Okay, can I start the broadcast?
Yep, it started.
Hi, everyone. Looks like people are still joining in. We're just going to give it another minute or two before we kick things off. In the meantime, I'm going to just kick off a poll to make sure that you're able to hear my voice. So let me do that. You should see a little poll pop up that asks if you are able to hear my voice. Okay, looks like we're improving on our technical efficiencies because so far we're 10 out of 10 saying 100% saying yes, you can hear me. Just give it one more minute because people are still joining in. Okay, I think this is a good start. So we've already got several people on, so I'll get started here. And let me do this. I'm gonna turn on the video here and share my screen with all of you. So you should be able to see the QuoteCQ screen up. Okay, so I'm going to get started with today. First of all, I'll just give you kind of an overview. I don't know if we have too many new people, but at least one or two maybe. So just want to give you guys an overview of what the purpose of today is. It's a relatively informal way for us to be able to just teach you guys more of a refresher course of what QuoteCQ is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be going through some functionality just to demonstrate to you its capabilities and answer some of the questions and things like that. There are some questions that were sent in between the last webinar and today, and they're really, I think, good, relevant questions that a lot of people tend to have. So I'm going to spend some time talking about those, and then we'll get back into the mix of things, and really I'm going to let you guys drive. So like the sound poll that you guys just saw where I'm asking, can you hear me? You'll see additional polls about, what's your role and what do you want to see and what do you want me to go to next, that kind of stuff. So it'll be a little bit engaging. It'll be a little bit conversational. A few things I'd like to remind everybody of. One is there is a Q&A option in this as well. So feel free to ask questions as we're going through this. So that way, if anything comes up that you want to know more about, please do not hesitate to ask those questions. Caitlin Dotson is also here with me, and she is going to be fielding some of those questions as well in writing. So, if it's a simple enough question to explain in writing, she'll do that. Otherwise, she'll prompt me to answer it for everybody. But I'll still also try to just recap as I see questions so that everybody, in case you didn't think to ask the question, then we can cover that as well. With that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. And what I'd like to start off with today is it's a fairly common type of question that we get, and it's related to the bill of material about how you can consolidate part numbers and line items when you're using QuoteCQ. So there's several scenarios where this comes up. The first scenario that comes up is I have a bill of material and there's a bunch of part numbers on it, but they're duplicated. So maybe it's an engineering BOM where, those types of bills of material where you have a reference designator, it's one reference designator for each line, but the MPN repeats itself. Or it could be that you have, sometimes it's just an error in the bill of material and they've put the same part number on two different rows instead of on one row. Another case could be it's a multi-level assembly with common parts across different sub-assemblies and you want to consolidate those for quoting purposes so you could leverage, volume purchasing, things like that. So there's quite a few different scenarios there, and I've lined up some examples for us to talk through. So I'm going to start off with just kind of a high-level explanation of what does it mean to consolidate a line item in QuoteCQ. And the best example I have of that is to go into here. So I'm going to click over here into this quote. And those of you who aren't familiar with kind of the layout, we did have previous webinars like this where we've kind of gone over the layout and things like that. So if you're brand new to QuoteCQ, I strongly recommend that you check out some of those previous recorded webinars as well. You'll find them in the knowledge base. That way, if you don't understand some of the more basic functionality, I think we're at a more advanced stage now where we're talking about multi-level bombs and things like that. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down here, and in the bill of material I had uploaded, you can see over here at the bottom, I've got line items 23, 24, and 25, and it's the same part number, but it's on 3 different line items. And the reason I'm using this one as an example is you wouldn't want to price this as quantity 1 per board, quantity 1 per board, quantity 1 per board. Instead, you'd want to do quantity 3 per board. And that's exactly the type of consolidation that QuoteCQ is looking for. So when you upload the bill of material and you're on the bill of material tab, it's keeping intact what you uploaded, right? So it's keeping that on separate line items. But when I go to the material costing tab, it's flattening and consolidating where it can. So now on the material costing tab, you can see down here, I've got line item 23, but that's referencing BOM line items 23, 24, and 25. So that's how it's handling when it finds duplications, whether it can consolidate or not. There are other cases where it won't consolidate. So for example, the part number above it, there is a difference in the MPN. So that's why it's not consolidating that. This one has an S in it, this one has a D in it. So that's why it didn't consolidate that. But there's also other factors that QuoteCQ is looking for to determine whether it can consolidate or not. And that's what I'm going to walk through here today. So let me do this. I have a spreadsheet here that will be a good example for us to walk through. Opening that up somewhere. Okay. Okay. So I've got 5 cases here that I wanted to show you guys. So I'm going to start with the first case, and this is kind of the simplest case that can happen. So over here in my bill of material, this is the example I just showed you, right? I have 2 different line items, and it's the same manufacturer part number, but it's a different quantity, for example, right? So I've got quantity 11 per board here and quantity 13 per board here. If I uploaded a bill of material that had this in there, then it would consolidate these 2 line items and treat it as a total quantity of 24 instead of treating it as a quantity of 11 and 13. The reason is because the manufacturer matches, the manufacturer part number matches. Now going down to a slightly more complex example, so I'm going to go to case 2 over here. And with case 2, I've got the same manufacturer, but a different manufacturer part number. Obviously, in this case, you wouldn't want to consolidate, right? Because having different manufacturer part numbers is critical. So it's not going to consolidate in this case. So you can see over here, I put a note here to say, yes, this will not merge. Case 3 talks about what happens if the manufacturer part number is the same, but the manufacturer is different. So I've got Kemet Electronics and Kemet Electronics Inc. over here. In this case, it will also not merge. The reasoning behind this is that QuoteCQ doesn't know that Kemet Electronics and Kemet Electronics Inc. are materially similar, right? It could just be a case where maybe it's completely different manufacturers and the manufacturer does make a difference in terms of whether it's the same component being referenced or not. So that's why in this case, because the manufacturer is different, QuoteCQ will not assume that we can merge these 2 things together. Going down to an even more complex example, sometimes you'll have a situation where you have multiple manufacturer part numbers associated to a single line item, right? So in this case, I have line item 7, and I have a Johansson part and a Vichet part in here. And then I have line item 8 with the same Johansson and Vichet part in there. In this case, it will merge these 2 line items, or these 4 MPN rows, into 1 line item with 2 MPNs in it. And then finally, I have this one where I have line item 9, which has the Johansson part, and then line item 10, which has the same Johansson part, but it also has an alternate, which allows them to use the Vishay part. In this case, it will not merge these two. Because the AVL is different, it's saying that you have to have this one be only Johansson, this one allows you to have others, so it will not automatically consolidate. Now, usually, not always, but usually when we see a case like this on a customer's bill of material, it is the result of just an engineering error, a bill of material error, or something like that, where they probably intended, if it's okay to use in this case, then it's usually okay to use in this case. And I keep emphasizing usually because that's not always the case. But when you see something like this, that's usually a red flag to say, well, you do usually want it to consolidate, but we don't assume that because sometimes there is good reasons for why not. Okay, let's see. There was a question here about how to locate all of the previous webinars if you weren't able to watch those, and I'll get into that here in a second. Okay, so I've got this example here, and what I'm going to show you is importing this bill of material, and of course it's not an actual bill of material, it's just a bunch of examples, but I'm going to import this into QuoteCQ so we can see what this translates to on the material costing view. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm just going to pick on an assembly that I've already created. Okay, so I'm going to click import, and it's already got the file because I was messing with this earlier. Okay, so I've got the same scenarios I was looking at earlier, right? So I've got line items 1 through 10, and I've got the chemet parts all the way down. So I'm going to go ahead and import this. And there you go. Now you can see I've got my bill of material just like I had it in my spreadsheet, line items 1 through 10, all the part numbers over here on the right-hand side. None of the consolidation is happening on the bottom tab. It will happen when we get to the material costing. I'm going to go ahead and submit this. And now we will move over to the material costing. And now we can compare. So I've got over here, you can see I've got line item 1 on my material costing, which translates to BOM line 1 and 2. So it did consolidate those. And if I compare that to my Excel file, so let me just put those side by side over here. Line item 1 and 2, we said would merge. And look at that, it did. So that's fine. Line item 3 and 4, it should not have merged. So, and that's because the MPN is different. And you can see over here, 3 and 4 did not merge. 5 and 6, we also said would not merge because of the difference in manufacturer. And you can see that over here, it did not merge. 7 and 8 would merge because it's the same manufacturer part number, same AVL configuration for both line items. So you can see that here. And then 9 and 10 also did not merge because of the reason I described earlier. With that, I'm going to just pause here in case there's any questions and kind of over-explain this a little bit as the questions come in. So I've got over here, it's consolidated the quantities. Now, when I run this update pricing function here, what it's going to do is it's going to assume this consolidated quantity, right? So it's not going to just assume the individual quantities. It is going to give me the price breaks that are applicable to this. So if I click into here, I should see the total quantity, which is 24 times 25 plus the liter plus the attrition. And that's how it's getting this information into here. So now you can see I've got all of these options for the combined 600 rather than the individual. Okay. And no questions coming in so far, so that's a good start. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go back over here. And I'm not going to take you, I think last time we went through the auto select and the review and things like that. So I'm not going to go through those types of details again. But if there are any specific questions about that, please feel free to ask. Okay, so that was scenario number 1. The second scenario I'd like to talk about is a multi-level assembly. So when I say multi-level assembly, what I'm referring to is the case where you have kind of a top-level assembly and there's sub-assemblies nested inside of it. And it can go as many layers deep as you need to, right? So it could be something that's, a big box build and it has like, several layers deep, or it could just be, a main assembly with like a daughter board to it or something like that. So a lot of different options there about how you treat it. The way that QuoteCQ handles a multi-level assembly is that it can have an unlimited number of levels for nesting. So what I mean by that is You can continue to have subassemblies of subassemblies of subassemblies as far as you need to. Let's see, there's a question here. Can you select an option to not consolidate the quantities because we have some cases where the customer wants each assembly quoted independently of each other? Yes, so that's a great question. And we're gonna get into that example where we haven't gotten to that example yet is the best answer I've got for you, where if you did want to quote each assembly separately, we're gonna cover that here in a second as well. But for now, let's just assume that it is a multi-level assembly that you want to quote together. And I'll go through that example, and then we'll get into, I have a total of 3 scenarios remaining. One is the multi-level assembly, where we're quoting the top level assembly and all corresponding subassemblies. The second scenario remaining is a package quote, where you have 3, let's just say 3 independent assemblies that you're quoting together. And then the final one is I have separate assemblies, or maybe sub-assemblies even, that you want to quote independent of each other because the customer might buy assembly A, but not assembly B. So we'll cover all 3 of those. Okay, so let's get into a multi-level bill of material example. So I've got an example worked up here, and the scenario we're looking at here is we're building a laptop, right? So, and I should say this is not a real bill of material, it's just a representative example. So you can see over here, I have a line item for a laptop, and when I click into this, you can see I've got 3 different sub-assemblies inside of it. So it's got my screen, my audio card, my motherboard, and when I click into my motherboard, for example, I've got 2 more. I've got the power supply and the RAM. And then if I click into the power supply, that's where I start to see my components. So I can also see all of the different levels of the bill of material over here in the footer. So if I click on BOM levels, then I can see starting from the top, I've got laptop, and then inside of it, I have a screen, an audio card. The audio card has speakers inside of it, and the mother card has these 2 subassemblies. So I can navigate this way as well. So I can, for example, just click on speakers, and it'll take me to the bill of material for the speakers. And the way I know that I'm looking at the speakers is in the bottom, I have this breadcrumb indicator to say, okay, I'm starting at the multi-level BOM, going into the laptop, going into the audio card. Now I'm looking at the speakers. Okay, so I've got that covered. I've got my bill of material. Now, I'm assuming the question is going to be, how do you get this type of bill of material into the system? So let me show you an example of the Excel file that I worked with here. So I'm going to open this up. Here we go. Okay. Now I should start by saying you do not have to format it like this. I did it this way just because I think it makes it a little bit easier to understand for the purposes of our presentation today. But you're not required to have it like this. It's just the color coding and things like that are to make it clearer for our conversation today. However, what is required is you do need to have a manufacturer part number and a quantity, just like always. But for a multi-level assembly, you also need to reference what is the parent part number, right? So for example, if I have a part number in here, then I should be able to say, what does this part number go inside of? And in this case, this part number goes inside of a screen, and the screen goes inside of a laptop. So that's how I've got it, is each row is referencing some parent assembly so that we can build up all the way to the laptop. The other thing to note is the part class now becomes a little bit more important. You don't have to have the SMT passive and the SMT active, so you don't have to get down to that level, but what you do have to do is identify where there is a make part versus a buy part. So wherever there's a make part, in my example, I've just called it assembly top level and assembly sub level. But basically what that means is that this is something that is going to have a bill of material inside of it. And that's how you get, when I go into my QuoteCQ screen over here, I'm just gonna go up 1 level. You see this icon that appears over here? The way that icon appears is when you've classified something as a make part using this part classification. So that's how you're gonna build out that material, that multi-level BOM. Now this is one way of having it, right? You could have everything as just one file and reference the parent and drop it in that way. The other option is sometimes you'll have a situation where the customer is giving you 10 different Excel spreadsheets and said, yeah, here's a drawing that explains how the whole thing comes together, but I've got the BOMs all in separate spreadsheets, so combine them however you like. And you can do that as well. So you can upload 10 different spreadsheets. So you can say, okay, I want to build out my BOM tree, and then I want to upload each of the 10 Excel spreadsheets one by one at each level. So both options are available to you there. You don't necessarily have to build out an Excel spreadsheet like this. So when I have an Excel spreadsheet like this, let me go back over here. I'm going to actually delete this one just so I can show you how it works. So let's go back all the way to the top. And I'm going to delete this. And then we're going to import, just drag and drop it in. Let's see, I've got multi-level BOM, drop that in. And again, it's looking for where it can find matches for things. So I'm going to say this is my parent part number. Everything else looks good to me. So I'm going to import that in. Oh, I guess I've got a different, let's see here. I'm just correcting the part classification naming. There we go. Okay. Okay, and that's got my bill of material in there now. And again, if I look, now I've got all the different assemblies in there. One thing to note here is you can submit each level of the BOM independently, or you can say, I want to submit everything below the level that I'm looking at right now, right? So for example, if I go down to the speakers and I'm looking at my speakers bill of material, and I say, yep, this looks good. I'm done with this one, but I'm not done with the rest of the assemblies, right? Then I can click submit. It says, okay, I'm submitting this, I got it. And now if I look at the BOM levels, the speakers has turned green, but the rest of it has not. And that's why the BOM tab is still black. It hasn't turned green to indicate that the entire BOM is submitted because the rest of it is still pending. And this is a very common issue that sometimes occurs. We get this in the support, the chat support all the time where people are saying, hey, I submitted my bill of material, but it's not letting me move forward. The reason I'll say like, more often than not is that, oh, you have a subassembly in there and the subassembly also needs to be submitted. Okay, the other option is if you're at the top level like this and you submit it, then it'll say, do you want to submit all BOM levels under this current level? And if you do that, then it'll say, okay, I've got this entire tree below me and I want to submit all of those. So if I click yes here, then it's gonna say, okay, well, I'm gonna go through and submit everything. So that's how you're seeing all of this turning green, indicating that the entire bill of material is submitted. And when all of those turn green, the bill of material tab also turns green. Now, again, going back to the scenarios we had earlier about BOM consolidation, looking at the material costing, and you can see that there are cases where it found common part numbers using the same logic that I described earlier, that it has done that consolidation. So you can see I've got these two line items from my BOM were consolidated. And if I click into it, I can also see, okay, it was line item 5 on the screens BOM and line item 8 on the speakers BOM. So that's how I can tell where did these parts originate from. Okay. Okay, moving forward here. So that's how you get the multi-level BOM. Now I'm going to go on to the next scenario, which is a package quote. So the scenario here is I have 3 bills of material completely independent of each other in terms of how they're built, but the customer has come to me and said, hey, we're doing this, this package quote where you're going to get 100% of this order or you're going to get 0% of it. So you might as well quote the whole thing together as one big list of parts rather than trying to split them up. So I'm going to look at this quote package over here. And here's how I've set up my bill of material. So I'll start with the RFQ. So in the RFQ, what I did is I just put in some quantities. Now this does assume that there's proportionality between the assemblies being quoted. And what I mean by that is, let me just go over here. Let's say the customer has asked to quote, I don't know, 3 different quantities for each assembly, right? So I have assembly A, assembly B, and assembly C. And if I wanted to quote this, I'm going to call this Q1, Q2, Q3. So these are the 3 quantities. It could be that they say, okay, I need 100 of each, I need 200 of each. Oops. And I need 300 of each. This is a very simple scenario, makes it very easy. We don't have to worry about it. But they might also say for every 100 of assembly A, I need double that for assembly B. So it'll be like this. That's also very easy. We can handle that because there is a ratio over here, which is a 1-to-1 or a 2-4-2 or a 3-6-3. It's consistently 1-to-1 basically is the ratio, right? So that makes it really easy. But let's say there is no proportionality between these. So let's just say the customers come to you and they said, I want 3, 5, 7, and then I want 11, 13, 17, and I want 19, 23, 29, right? There is no ratio between these numbers to create a consistent proportion. And the reason that that's important is because when we're quoting these assemblies, if it's proportional, then it makes it really easy from a quoting perspective to say, okay, for every one of these, I need this many of this one. But when you get into this type of scenario, what ends up happening is I've got 3 different possible combinations here, multiplied by 3 different possible combinations here, multiplied by this. So already I'm looking at 27 possible combinations of a part being quoted. And that's why this type of scenario becomes far more tricky compared to the scenario of having proportions between them. So now, knowing that, I'm going to go back here and we're going to take a look at this one, right? So the way that you handle a package quote in QuoteCQ right now is you can go in here and you just manually add 3 line items. So I'm going to actually delete what I have in here just to show you how we're going to do this. I'm going to delete this bomb. We're just going to start from scratch. Okay, so I've got nothing in here right now. I'm going to click add line item, and I'm going to say this is my line item 1, and I need 100 of this one. And the part class is going to be assembly top level. And this is, click someone else here, top assembly A. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Then I click the plus sign again, and I'm adding line item 2, and I'm putting 100 in here. And this is also a top assembly. Oh, I don't know why it's doing that. Top B, and I'm going to add one more. This is going to be top C. Let's try that. Now I have to do the other fields. That's annoying. Okay. 100. Oh, and we said this one would be 300. So let me change that here. So I'm going to put this, and we said this one would be, let's say, double that. All right. Okay. So I've got 3 rows in here, and I'm happy with the way this looks. So I've got 3 different top level assemblies that I'm going to be putting in. So I'm going to submit that. And what that's done for me now is I have under my bomb levels, I've got 3 different assemblies that I can load in. So I'm going to click on top A over here, and I'm going to import a bill of material for that. Oh, whoops, that's not what I want to do. Delete that line. I'm going to import the bomb. That's not the bomb I want. Okay, so I'm going to pick top A, finds my bill of material. It says, okay, this is the bill of material, and it's found all the columns and everything. Fine. I'm going to go ahead and import. Now I've got my top A bomb in here. Then I'm going to go to top B and do the same thing. Again, not the bomb I want. I think because I went through this process earlier, it's just trying to remember the bomb from before. Meanwhile, let me know if you guys have any questions. Okay, I'm going to go to top C, do the same thing. Okay, so now I've got all 3 bombs. So I'm just going to go ahead, instead of going one by one through them and submitting them, I'm just going to submit all of them from the top level. And now I've got all 3 of them submitted. So that's good. And now the bomb tab's also turned green. And now I'm going to go to the material costing. And what you should see is Where there was common parts, again, it has consolidated. So I had this part over here, the Murata TDK line items got consolidated. The CUI part here got consolidated, but the other ones did not because there was no overlap. And I also see the top A, B, and C over here, but they're marked as DNP because they're make parts, so there's nothing to purchase over there for that. Okay, so that was scenario number 2, where you have 3 different BOMs and the customer wants to buy them all together. So you want to consolidate common quantities where there are any. Otherwise, I want to keep them loaded in separately. Okay, now let's get into the question that we had come in, which is, let's see. There's a question here that says, give me a second to read it here. Oh, okay. This is a great question. So it says, once material costing is complete, we usually make a homemade Excel report with multi-level costed BOM and add CSV tabs for material costing. This is a lot of file manipulation. Is there a standard report that we could use instead containing all of that information? Absolutely. So let me show you over here. I guess the multi-level BOM that we were working with might be a good example. So let me go in here. I'm just going to run pricing on this so that I can show you the reports, because you can export a multi-level BOM out of here. So let's go ahead and run update pricing. We'll just give it a second to finish the update pricing. Just while that's running, I'll point out that on any screen within these tabs, you'll see there's an actions button, and all of those do have a reports button where you can actually go in and pick from a variety of different reports. So once we finish the auto select on this, I'm going to show you what that looks like, what some of the options are for those reports. The other thing I should add is oftentimes there's very specific needs from our customers about, I need the report to have these columns in this order and that kind of thing. And that's where it does get a little bit trickier, right? Because I mean, for every customer, there would be 5 different versions of an Excel file, which, obviously not fun for you guys because the reports would constantly be changing, but also not fun for us. So what we have for that is something called Report Builder, and I'll go over that as well. So let's go in here, and I'm just going to say this is time sensitive. We want to just select everything that we possibly can and move on. Okay. Okay, so I'm done with material costing. Now I want to download the report. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go over here. Now I have the costed BOM report. And you can see there's a bunch of other reports in here as well, but I'm looking at the costed BOM for now. And then I want so I can have the consolidated report, which is what you're seeing on the material screen. For example, where I have one line item that has the combined part number over here. But instead, I want the multi-level costed BOM report. And I'm going to download that. And when you download the multi-level costed BOM report, let's pull it up here. You can see it's got a separate tab for each of the levels of the bill of material. So you can see each tab broken out by subassembly. So that way, if you did want to break it out, you could. It's just like the consolidated costed BOM report, except that it's broken out. Now, one thing I always caution against on here is, for example, if you had a part number that was combined for the purposes of quoting, but you exported out in this tabular format, if you show the customer the tabular format, you just want to be careful that you don't end up saying, well, this is the price at this quantity, because it's not. The pricing was determined based on the combined volume across all of the subassemblies. But this is just showing you, this is where you can allocate the cost if you wanted to, using, for financial purposes. But you wouldn't want to risk your customer assuming, oh, I don't have to buy the other subassemblies. I can just buy this one and still keep the same price, because obviously that could change. There's a question here, do all the tabs have the same information, i.e. CPN, internal part number? I believe so, yeah, so there's internal part number and customer part number columns here as well. I didn't populate that when I uploaded my BOM, but yes, column N and O over here, and column N and O again, oops. column N and O over here also. So yeah, it'll be the same format across all the different tabs. That was another question. Okay, so I showed you the multi-level, the consolidated version, just so you guys can see the difference. I download that. This is what the consolidated version looks like. So instead of in column N and O, now it's got the internal part number and customer part number and K and L, but similar type of structure for everything else after that. So all that information is still unchanged. So you do have both options there. Now, one other thing I want to show you is if you wanted to, I know we have some customers that are not in the US. While most of our customers deal only in a single currency, some of our customers do deal with multiple currencies. And so if you wanted to, you can also have the report downloaded in the original currency that was quoted to you by your supplier. So that's also an option available to you. Okay. The next thing I want to show you is something that we call Report Builder, and I think this might get to the root of the earlier question as well. This is a screen where you can manipulate kind of the layout of the report, right? So for example, if I wanted the manufacturer to be to the right of the manufacturer part number, I can just drag that across. If I wanted to hide this column, I can do that. What I'm doing is setting up the layout of the report as I like it, and I can save that layout. So for example, I can say Chintan's favorite columns, and it has it arranged in a particular way that's of interest to me. And when I do that and I export it, it'll give it to me in this layout. Now in this report format, I should clarify that in this report format, you do not have the option to do the multi-level versus the consolidated. There is some limitations there with what we can do. So I'd say, yeah, if you're using the CSV or if you're using this report builder format, then you wouldn't be able to get the separate tabs for each of the subassemblies, but the standard costed BOM does have the option for multi-level or consolidated. Okay, I'll pause for just another moment here in case there's a follow-up question to that, because I know I covered a lot all at once there, so feel free to ask, otherwise I'm going to move on. Okay. While if you are thinking of any questions, I'm going to launch another poll here because as soon as I finish the next example, I'd like to get into whatever is of most interest to you guys. And we have quite a few people on the call again. So I'm going to launch this poll over here. And basically what I'm looking for is, you know, what's your role in the quoting process? So that way we can cover things that would be of most interest to you. But of course, use the Q&A, use the chat to also say, hey, this is an area I'm interested in, and we'll just go in whatever direction you choose to go. Okay, moving on. So the third scenario that we were talking about is the scenario where you have a customer coming to you and saying, I have 3 assemblies, don't combine them. I might give you assembly A, but not assembly B and C. So don't assume that they can be combined. And so for that reason, we're going to treat them as separate. And so here's, I'll start with how you would set this up from the beginning, right? So when I create a new RFQ, what I would do is, let's just say the scenario I'm working with is, remember the top A, top B, top C that I was working with earlier? I don't know if that's a me issue or an internet issue here. Now I'm getting a sign that says internet connection unstable. Oh, there we go. I think I'm back. Caitlin, keep me honest here if you can't hear me anymore. I'm sure somebody will point that out to me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create some RFQ over here. Well, I don't know what's happening. Okay, so turnkey, this is new, put in by me. I'm going to put myself as a customer. I'm going to say there's 3 assemblies that we're quoting and we want to treat them independently. So they're not going to be combined. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to say this is top A. And then let's just say they have quantities over here. So 100, 200, 300. And then I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say this is top B. And this is 200, 400, 200, what was it, 600. And then this is top C. And this is going to be, again, 100, 200, and 300. So I'm just setting it up as 3 different assemblies. So when I'm creating the RFQ, if I create them like this, as assembly 1, assembly 2, assembly 3, and not do it on the BOM page, then it does treat each of these entirely separate from one another, meaning that there will be no overlapping of or combining or consolidation of materials. There will be no combining of the the labor setup costs, things like that. None of that stuff happens. It treats them completely independent of each other. So the example I like to use is, this is the a la carte option for your customer, right? Where they can choose assemblies 1 and 2, but not assembly 3. Whereas the previous scenario we covered is the fixed menu option, where you get all 3 assemblies or you get none of the assemblies. So with this, I'm going to submit it. And instead of giving me 1 row on the RFQ list, instead it will give me 3 rows. So I've got top A, top B, and top C. So 3 different rows were created. And now with this, I can go in and it's just a matter of dropping in my bill of material and mapping the columns. And I just run this through like a normal quote, like I normally would. Now, when I finish all 3 of these, what will happen is I do have the option to print off a PDF quote report at the end that does have each of those assemblies listed out in their own grid with their own quantities and turn times and prices and excess materials and all of that stuff. So that's all fine. You can keep that on the same PDF, but they will still all have their own notes and their own quantities and everything. So it is kind of like meshing together a bunch of quotes into one continuous PDF rather than treating them as one quote, because they're 3 quotes. The customer could choose 1 and 2, but not the 3rd. And as a result of that, because you're treating them as independent, you can also mark top A as being a 1 quote, while top B is a lost quote. So you can manage it at that level as well, to say my win-loss ratio can be determined because these are independent decisions that the customer is making. Okay, I know that was a question earlier as well. So to the person who asked that question, let me know if that answered it. Okay, there's a question here. How do I report the total dollar volume quoted each month? Great question. So there's a couple different ways that gets handled. So let me show you firstly, I'm going to go into here. So we had this quote that we were working on, right? When I send this quote, so I'm going to mark this as sent. There's an option in here to say, okay, I'm going to follow up. And when I mark this to follow up, I'm going to say this is a warm lead and I have a follow-up date. And there's a potential revenue field in here. The reason this potential revenue field exists is because to have a report of total dollar volume quoted, that's a very difficult thing to do, because in this case, I've got quantity 1, 2, and 4. So what is my price that I quoted? Well, it could be 300 times 1, or I'll look at the total revenue here. It could be 332, 365, or 430. So which number do I pick? That's why we have this field for potential revenue. So when I mark this as sent, it's saying, look, we could use the higher end, we could use the lower end, we could use the average, but none of those are good, accurate indicators, or not so accurate as at least somebody who is familiar with this deal to be able to say, yeah, the customer asked for 1 piece, 5 piece, 5,000 pieces, and 10,000 pieces, but realistically, they're looking at the 1 piece and the 5 piece. So that's why we say the potential revenue field is very important. So as you mark this as sent, you would say, you know what, in this case, I'm expecting them to order the middle price here. So I'm going to just put in 365 over here. So that's option number 1. Option number 2 is when you mark this quote as 1. So let me do this. I'm going to say I won this quote. And when you do that, it also has a field for actual revenue. And you can say, yes, that was accurate with the 365, or nope, they ended up giving us a little bit more than that. So we ended up getting the higher quantity. So there you go. I've got 430, and that's fine as well. So I'm going to say, yeah, it was the 4 piece at 430, and I can save that. And I'm not going to send it to QuoteCQ right now. Those of you who haven't seen or heard about QuoteCQ, that's our purchasing module. But for the purposes today, I'm just focused on the quoting side of it. I'm going to cancel that. Okay, so I've got the 430. Now, the way that shows up, there's a couple different ways. One is that I can go into my reporting over here. And this is Candidly, not a report that really gets used very often, but I can go in here and I can see my opportunity pipeline. And this is where you would see all the different quotes that I have that are currently pending, not heard back from the customer yet, in a follow-up state, and what is the, where you saw that drop down of like how warm is the lead, and it's like cold, warm, or hot. So it's got it broken out by that category. You can also break it out by job, and you can look at best case scenario, worst case scenario, or the potential revenue field. So what that means is the highest of the highs, the lowest of the lows, or what this person put into the potential revenue. So in this case, in our demo system, the potential revenue field isn't filled out, so that doesn't mean anything. If I look at the worst case, that's $940. And if I look at the best case scenario, that's $356,000, right? So again, the total volume quoted by each month, usually not so relevant unless you're using the potential revenue field. One thing I should add is that typically our customers use a CRM, or we recommend that they use a CRM for tracking their opportunities and deal flow. And CRMs do have quite a bit more robustness to them in terms of measuring the strength of the pipeline. With QuoteCQ, you do have the ability to integrate into your CRM, depending on what you're using, as long as they have API integrations available. One of the examples that we have, just because in QuoteCQ internally we use HubSpot as a tool, QuoteCQ does have the ability to link into your HubSpot account to pull back customer and deal flow information. It just helps you pre-populate some of that information. Down the line, I think as we start to see more customers adopting a CRM, we'll probably invest further into that to make sure that updates of the quote status can flow through to your CRM. Okay. There's another question here. When we price one column, quantity break, with different criteria, and then the other column, but when I go into the price to review and want to apply price of column 2 to column 3 and 4, but not 1, it will apply to column 1 as well. Okay, I think that this is a question when we're in the material costing screen. So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit, and we're going to look at the material costing screen. I think the question is when I'm in here, so let's say I've got my pricing in here, I go into here, and there's this apply to all quantity button, and just correct me if I'm going on the wrong track here to the person that asked that question. But if I choose this apply to all quantities button, then it is true. So when I say apply to all quantities, it is applying it to all of the quantities. So it's not just the quantities to the right, it's to the quantities to the left and to the quantities to the right. So in this case, I've got quantities 1, 5, and 10. So it is showing me, okay, I'm going to apply this to 1, 5, and 10. It will not just say, oh, you're on 5, therefore you must mean 5 and 10, just because this is one of those things where there is no, I'll say there is no right answer. A lot of our customers prefer to have it apply to all the quantities, and others would say, no, it should just be to the right. Others would say, no, we're going to apply it individually to each of the columns. So if that was your question, that's kind of the answer is yes, you're correct in the understanding that when you click apply to all quantities, it will apply it to all of the columns, not just to the ones to the right. Okay, any other questions here before we move forward? Okay. There was one other question that had come up between the last webinar and today that somebody had asked us to cover, which is related to the lead quantity and attrition that we have in QuoteCQ. So let me just kind of give you guys a brief background on what that means. So I'm going to click into, let's see if I can click into an assembly here. Okay, so when you upload a bill of material into QuoteCQ, or let's just say more broadly speaking, when you're quoting something in general, if you were building 10 pieces of an assembly and that quantity 10 assembly quote had a resistor on it, you couldn't buy exactly 10 resistors, even if it's quantity 1 per board, because necessarily through the manufacturing process, through the setup process, you're going to lose some pieces, right? And you don't want to have a line down situation over a part that costs basically nothing. It's more about making sure that you can meet the deadline of the customer. And so one of the functionalities that we have in CalcuQuote is the ability for you to set leader and attrition. So there's these columns over here for lead quantity and attrition rate. And what that means is that you can actually tell the system that for this line item, not only do I want to buy whatever is the required quantity to put on the board, but I also want to buy some extra. And so that some extra is calculated based on the lead quantity and the attrition values that you put in here. So I'll use a simple example here. Let's just say I've got quantity 2 per board and I'm building, let's say 100 assemblies, right? So what that means is on the PCB itself, I'm gonna need 200 pieces of this ceramic capacitor because 2 per board times 100, that's 200. But I've also got it configured to say I need 25 extra for setup scrap and 5% extra for just attrition as I go through the manufacturing process. I might lose some, I might rework some, whatever. And so the real math becomes 2 times 100 equals 200. That's 200 for the board, plus 25 setup scrap, so that's 225, plus 5%. So altogether, I'm gonna need 230 pieces of this. Now, if I go to my material costing over here and look at line item 2, well, I don't have 100 quantity. Well, we'll look at 5, let's see. So you can see it calculated 36. So if I was building exactly to the PCB, I've got 2 per board times 5, that would just get me 10, but add in 25, so 10 plus 25 gets me to 35, and then 5% of 10 gets me to 1 extra, just rounded it off. So that's how it came up with the 36. So that's the calculations behind it. The other thing I'd like to point out is that you don't necessarily have to manually set what the leader and the attrition is. You can associate that to the part class over here. So for example, if I change this part classification to be a BGA, then what it's gonna do, I'm gonna keep that. Oh, it was, whoops. Okay, let's try that again. Change that and saying, yes, update the values. So you can see over here, my BGA is associated to 5 and 1. Because BGAs are more expensive, I've configured my demo system to say, don't buy 25 extra BGAs, just buy 5. And don't buy 5% overage, buy 1% overage. So you can do those kinds of things as well. So you can associate the part class to default the leader and quantity unless you specify otherwise. So even though it's defaulted to 5 and 1, I can still go in and overwrite that to whatever I want to, and that's perfectly okay. It'll use the calculations based off of this, but it's making a recommendation based off of the part class. The other thing is, how do you set that up? How do you get your system configured to populate the leader and the attrition? Well, the way you do that is you can go into the settings over here. So I'm gonna go into here and look at the part class configuration and the part type configuration. So in this, for SMT-BGA, as an example, I have, here's the lead quantity, here's the attrition. So the 5 and the 1 goes in here. You also have additional options in here for the minimum purchase quantity. So in some cases, we have customers say, I want a minimum of 250 pieces of a resistor, no matter how you do the calculation, right? If I'm building one assembly and it's 1 per board and the calculation comes out to 42, that doesn't matter. I'm gonna buy 250 just to make sure I don't end up having any shortages. So you can put in a minimum purchase quantity in here as well. And then just because CalcuQuote's always being updated based on customer feedback, we now also have the ability, if you wanted to apply a line level markup, then you can specify that at the part class level to default. So you can say, for part classes that are BGAs, I want to have a 1% markup, whereas for passives, I want to have a 5% markup. And that just replaces the summary tab. And we can get into that more if there are questions, but I think most of the people here are more on just the material side of it anyway, so I'll focus on that for now. Okay, so we covered that. The final thing I want to point to is, let me go back over here. Where was the one I was just looking at? Let's say it's here. Okay, so I've got, in this case, I don't have my part class in here, right? But I want to populate the part class and the leader and the attrition. So how do I go about doing that? The way you can do that is we have this ability to scrub your BOM, and you can say, okay, I want you to look this up from my historical pricing, and I want to do it for all of my line items. And what's going to do is it's going to say, in the past, these manufacturer part numbers were classified in a certain way. They had a certain leader and attrition. They had a certain number of number of leads, like solder joints. So it's going to look up all of that information, and that's what it's pulling. So it's pulled in all kinds of information for me. And because this is our demo system, we've had conflicting entries, right? So sometimes we've classified something as a passive, active, or BGA just for example purposes. That's why it's highlighting red over here to say, wait, you've been confused about what this part is in the past. But what it's prioritized is the one that is assigned most often to that part. So that's how it's got that in here. Now, if I click next and apply the updates, then it's going to just update the part class, the leader, the attrition for all of those. Okay, any questions about that? Okay, we've got some time left. I'm going to pause for questions, but looks like we had mostly people that were on the BOM and materials side, so hopefully this was helpful to you guys. I'm going to, again, launch a poll just to get some feedback. We want to make sure that this continues to be valuable for you guys, so feel free. We've got a couple minutes here, and I want to make sure we address your questions or collect questions for us to address next time. So go ahead and type in those questions and let us know what you're thinking, and we'll keep going with it in the future. Okay, looks like good positive results here. While we're waiting on this, I want to point out there was a question earlier about how you can access the webinars in the future. So if you don't have the ability to attend the webinars in the future, and I strongly recommend, I'm just going to show you. So there's this help button over here that when you click on it, and I'm not going to click on it just because I have like the admin view of it, but when you click on it, it will take you to the knowledge base. And this is what the knowledge base looks like from your perspective. So what happens is when you get to the knowledge base, there's all kinds of help articles here. So for example, when we covered the lead quantity and attrition, you can find an article that explains that. And the same thing that I talked about, in terms of how the math is done, there's definitely lots of articles in there for that kind of stuff. We also have, I'm gonna go back over here. We also have release notes in here. So if there's anything that was released recently, then you can see all of those. So the line level markup thing that I was just pointing to, you can see that. And there's always articles for those types of new functionalities as well. And then the webinars itself, I think, and Caitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, are in here. I think they're in here, but I don't know where. Caitlin, you want to chime in and let me know, because I'm a little lost.
Yeah, the recent ones we've done, they're actually under the QuoteCQ because they've been QuoteCQ specific.
Gotcha.
QuoteCQ training videos or training course.
Gotcha. Okay. So virtual refresher course, there you go. So you can click into here and find the recordings as well. So the path is LearnCQ, QuoteCQ, video training course. Can CQ automatically fill in the part class? So the way that we can do it today is to do that scrub BOM feature. So that's how it populated this, but it can't fill it in unless it knows what to fill it in with. Because each of our customers has a part class that is custom to them, we don't have like a standardized part classification function in here. So today, the best way to get the part class populated is to do that scrub my BOM thing and pull it in from history. Otherwise, you would have to manually set what the part class is. Okay. Final thing, just going back here, one thing I like to point out is also, if you are looking for other things in here, there's also lots of things related to other softwares that we have. So ShopCQ, SearchCQ, BidCQ. But what I want to point to is, I think it's in here. No, it's under community, sorry. When you go into the community view, you can see several different forums that we've started to create as well. So there's feature requests where there's plenty of people providing feedback about what features they'd like to see, new product requests where if there's something new that's outside the scope of what QuoteCQ's doing today, but you'd like to see us working on it. And then we also started recently a cybersecurity forum. So there's definitely various different options for you to get engaged and build an online community. Soon, you'll also be seeing, if you haven't noticed already, in your profile view, there's badges in here. And what we're trying to do is just get an understanding of what people are, are becoming more experts in CalcuQuote. And so for that, you'll start to see, as you achieve higher badges, you'll get contacts from our team, rewarding you with some goodies and participation in some exclusive online communities as well. So definitely check that out. It's just over here. You click on your icon and you click on profile, and that'll just get you a little bit more engaged with the quoting community in EMS. Okay, with that, I think we're at the bottom of the hour. So I'm going to break for now, and we will be doing this again. Looks like based on your feedback, this was helpful. So we'll continue doing it until somebody says, all right, we're tired of hearing your voice. But thank you all so much for attending, and we will talk to you next time.